Okay, hold on a second. There's a beautiful letter the Rebbe wrote to the residents of Kfar Chabad. I'm going to paraphrase it from the Hebrew. This was a letter written in the 3rd of Av in 1954. Greetings and blessings to the Hasidim and the residents of Kfar Chabad in Israel. God bless you all. Much peace and blessing, adding K without any limit, exclamation point. I received your letter that I read before Rosh Chodesh by the resting place of my father-in-law, who was our Rebbe, leader of the Jewish people, and certainly he will arouse great mercy for every single man and woman and all they need, both materially and spiritually. It's already been said, my words have already been said in many, many places, according to that which is explained in Chassidus, that we need to bring down from the source. And our intent to bring from the source is that it should come literally down in this world, which this is Hashem. So we want to bring down from the source, we want it to reach literally to this world, because this is the world that Hashem wants a home in. And that is accomplished through tzedakah, as explained in the Geras HaKodesh, in the Alter Rebbe's letters in many places. And the vessel is peace. As the conclusion of our Torah in the Gemara, God did not find a greater vessel for blessing for the Jewish people than peace. And that's the Gemara says. There's no greater vessel for blessing than peace. It's also known, the announcement of Tzemach Tzedek, that Aleph Beis, the Hebrew alphabet, the first letters of the Hebrew alphabet stand for Ava Bracha. Where there is love, Ava, there is bracha, Ava bracha. And the more you add in the Aleph, the more you add in the love, you could trust in Hashem, to be certain that Hashem will add in the base. The more you add in the Aleph, the more Hashem will add in the base. And speaking at length for you is totally, in other words, considering who you are, the Rebbe says, speaking at more length is totally unnecessary. And the Rebbe continues and talks about how at that time they wrote the letter was during the 9 days. So as our prophets have prophesied, these days should be transformed days of gladness and joy. And automatically the cause for the exile will be rectified as well, which the cause of the exile is senseless hatred. And it will be rectified in a way that there will be transformation from one extreme to another, from darkness to light, from bitterness to sweetness, which will bring an abundance of peace, an abundance of love, and automatically an abundance of sustenance, both physical and spiritual. I await to hear good news in all of the categories, all the things that the Rebbe is speaking about lots of peace, lots of love, lots of sustenance, spiritually, physically. I await your goodness in all the above, because ha b'ha talya, they depend on each other. Meaning, the more love and the more peace, the more aleph, the more abundance there is, both materially and spiritually, the more base. The more aleph, the more base. That's what it writes in this letter. In a similar way, this upcoming Torah portion is about how we stood at the foot of Mount Sinai, like one person with one heart. And it's about how the Torah unites us all. And that spirit, I want to learn with you a sikha from volume 16, Kut Sichas, on the words in this week's Torah portion, and he camped there. This verse is talking about how the Jewish people camped at the foot of Mount Sinai. The Torah uses a singular he camped there, despite the fact that we're talking about a lot of people, because they were like one person with one heart. And he camped there next to the mountain, and Rashi comments, they camped there like one person with one heart. And there is a midrashic teaching that whenever, at any other time that we camped, there was arguments. What was unique over here was that we were like one person with one heart. So I was going to discuss the way Rashi presents this teaching versus the way the Mechilta presents this teaching, and the various messages that Rashi is presenting and the Mechilta is presenting, and then bring it down into a deeper spiritual way. Let's go to the beginning of the Sikha. Ois Aleph. Al pasuk v'yichan sham Yisrael neged ahar nem Mechilta v'chol makim hu emer v'yisa v'yachnu neis machlekes v'chein machlekes aval kan hushvil levechad. Mechilta says, in any other place where the Torah describes the Jewish people leaving or arriving, it says it in the plural. And they camped and they traveled. Here, they were all together with one heart. Because in that every other journey, it says it in the plural because they left with an argument and they arrived with an argument. What was unique here is that they were all together with one heart. That's what Mechilta says. My mother is there, move a gam Pirish Rashi al Altera. Pirish Rashi nemer madvarim b'seder hapuch. Yichasham Yisrael b'kishachad b'levachad aval shakal chaniz tumas machlekes. Rashi seems to say the exact same thing, but he phrases it in the exact opposite order. Rashi says they camped there he camped there in the singular. He camped there like one person with one heart. All of Israel is counted as one person because they were like one person, like one heart. But all the other journeys were with a machlekes, with an argument. Hear the difference? The Mechilta says wherever we find them traveling, there are arguments. What was unique over here is that there was no argument. Rashi just begins with, this place was fantastic. This place, there was no argument. All other places, there was an argument. In other words, Rashi begins with the positive and ends with the negative, and Mechilta begins with the negative and ends with the positive. Rashi says, this was special, they were all together. All the other places they traveled, there was an argument. The Mechilta says, all other times they traveled, it was with an argument. Here, they were together with love. The it sounds like that what was unique from the Mechilta's perspective was the fact that here they were together, because he begins with wherever else they traveled, there was an argument. Here was unique that they were together. So you would expect them to be with the arguments as they are every other time. Whenever the Jews travel, there are arguments and they leave, arguments and they arrive. This was unique that they were all together. So what was unique, what was special, what was novel was the fact that they were all together. That's what the Mechilta says. But Rashi says what was novel over here was that there were arguments every other time they traveled. In other words, Rashi is saying that what was novel wasn't that they were together here in Matan Torah. What was novel, what was unusual was the fact that every other time they traveled, there was an argument. The fact they were together over here is natural. Of course, they were like one person with one heart. But there were other occasions, every other occasion, that there were arguments. That was novel. That's unusual. That's the way Rashi phrases it. That's the way Mechilta phrases it. Of course, if 99% of the time there's an argument, the 1% of the time there isn't an argument, you would think that the novel thing is the fact that there's no argument, as Mechilta says. But Rashi is phrasing it this way, as we shall see, to present something very, very deep. Let's go. Ois base. Pashtus neve hevdel min a hevdel shmin Rashi and Mechilta b'derech halimim and pasuk farhuz berabaver. On the surface, you could say that the difference between Rashi and Mechilta and the way they phrase this teaching has a lot to do with the method, how the Mechilta teaches the Torah and the Mechilta interprets the Torah, to the way Rashi interprets the Torah. Because of their various methods of interpretation of Torah, that's why they come to different conclusions and how they derive things from the verse, as we shall see in a second. By the way, I don't know if you're following along inside, but as much as you're gaining by learning outside, if you follow the Sikha inside, you will actually learn how to read the words a lot better. Okay. How does the Mechilta know that every other time they traveled, there was an argument. He understands this because the Torah says they traveled, they camped, in the plural. And therefore, what's unique over here? The fact that Torah says he camped in the singular. So the Mechilta says that all other times they traveled, why is the Torah presented in the plural? Because there was a pluralistic division among the Jewish people when they traveled. There was argument, there was separation. According to Rashi, his inference that there was arguments every other time that we traveled is not from the words in the plural. And they traveled and they camped. You have to remember, Rashi always tries to explain the Torah in a very simple way. So according to Rashi, the fact that it says they camped and they traveled is logical because there was more than one person that camped and more than one person that traveled. From the Mechilta's perspective, Mechilta is a medrash. Mechilta hears the word they camped, they traveled. How does Mechilta interpret that? There's division. On a midrashic level, the plural wording indicates division and separation. But if you're looking at it from a very simple perspective, from a very literal translation, why does it say they camped, they traveled? Because there wasn't just one person camping and traveling, there was many people. We're talking about many people, talking about many tribes. So then how does Rashi know that whenever, every other time that we travel, there was an argument? Rashi interprets this from the words in the Torah, and they camped, and he camped there. The Torah says there, he camped. This was unique. They camped in other places too, but it was there that there was something special. Since the Torah emphasizes the word there, it tells us that there was something unique about the way that they camped there. And what was unique, says Rashi, what was unique was that they camped together with one heart. So the Mechilta interprets the argument, the Mechilta infers that there were arguments in every other juncture of their journey. The fact that it says they camped, they traveled, the plural words to Mechilta suggest division. Rashi, on the other hand, he interprets the fact that it says they camped, they traveled, literally. There were many people, many tribes that camped and traveled. How does the Rashi know that there were arguments every other time that we traveled? There was an argument. I was in the front, you were in the back, you said you didn't carry my suitcase. How does Rashi know that there were arguments every other time that they camped and traveled? Rashi knows this because of the extra word there. They camped there. Sorry, he camped there. Since the Torah emphasizes it was there, it was unique, that it tells us that there was something that was not by every other journey. Only in this journey was there this singular, one heart, one person kind of feeling, but all other journeys were with an argument. I see him on the next page. And see he should be from shall carve ein bevadai like the tachen machlekes chulu. Im kach madua nemer shama yisla shanabim bidem it's bial if you mechilta al neis machlekes. But according to this, we need to now reevaluate the mechilta. How come we learn from the expression that they traveled, that in the plural, that there was an argument? Now that we have this other verse, and he camped there, we have this other emphasis. Why does Mechilta insist that the source for the argument is from the plural? Question number one. Question number two is, the Mechilta says that in their first juncture of the journey, when they left Ramses and they came to Sukkot, it says they traveled that journey in an instant. In the blink of an eye, they left Ramses and they came to Sukkot. As the Torah says, I will carry you on eagle's wings, and this was a miraculous journey. In an instant, they traveled. So it's impossible that there was an argument during that journey because it was in an instant. I wish my children would understand this Mechilta. They managed to go pretty quickly, especially when we're on a trip. But I guess in a blink of an eye, there's not too much you can argue about. Anyways, so the journey in a blink of an eye certainly violates. It's impossible to have an argument in a blink of an eye. So according to Mechilta, that the first journey was in a blink of an eye. Why does the Torah employ the plural? And they traveled and they camped if we're talking about a journey which must have not had any argument. If the Mechilta infers from the plural words, they camped and they traveled, there's an argument. First of all, over here it says they camped, they traveled, there couldn't have been an argument. And the question is, why did Torah use those words if there is no argument? It's at Sheni, Gam Pirsh Rashi, Ein Muvan. Madu Meisifa Tele Pasuk says Amila Sham Gdi Lishal Valema Shashakal Chlis B'Turubis B'Chleikas Madu Choshev L'Nimis Kaim Tzip Mantera L'Nishal Yisrael B'Shakal Machnias. According to Rashi, we have a bigger question. According to Rashi, the question like this: the Torah is saying something so beautiful and majestic about the Jewish people. They were like one person with one heart. So the Torah emphasizes here in the story, it was there that they were like one person with one heart. Every other time they traveled, there was an argument. The Torah uses the word there to highlight that this was unique. Why emphasize the negative? Why say the Torah doesn't try to say anything negative about anybody at any time? So how come here, at the giving of the Torah, such a wonderful, majestic moment in history, that as our Rebbes have said many times, there will never be another reenactment or repetition of the giving of the Torah. The giving of the Torah is a one-time thing. So if it's so special and it's so wonderful, how come the Torah has to put in right there and emphasize, you know what, this was special, but by the way, every other time they traveled, there was a fight. There were fights. They were okay now, but every other time there was a fight. It's like you're telling your children, it's great getting along, but not like you always do. You always are fighting. This is why would you do that? It's special. It's majestic. You celebrate the moment. How come the Torah is not celebrating the moment and saying this is great and wonderful? Instead, the Torah is saying this was special, fine, but by the way, every other time there was fights the whole way through. Why do that? Why would the Torah want to do that? Why would the Torah want to put out the negative in the middle of this very, very positive, powerful message? Okay, those are our questions. Let's go to Gimel to see the answers. The explanation of this is as follows. Pirush Rashi derech hapshat. Rashi, as we said before, explains things in a literal way. When Rashi says they were arguing in every trip, those words mean something different to what Mechilta means when he says they were arguing in every trip. What does Rashi mean? Rashi speaking in a literal way. What does an argument mean? Rashi means there were actual disagreements. I was supposed to be in the front over here. Why is your family encroaching on our space? Don't you know that everyone has a little space around them? And Rashi means there was fights. That's what Rashi says. If Rashi uses the words fights, he means fights. Next column, just because it says they camped, they traveled, doesn't mean there were fights. That just means a lot of people were traveling. So only because the Torah adds the word there, they camped there, like one person with one heart, that's how we know that every other time they traveled, there was a fight. That's how Rashi looks at this pasuk. On the other hand, what does Mechilta mean when he says there were arguments in every other trip? He doesn't mean there were fights. According to Mechilta, it's a medrash. So the words fights mean something different. What does Mechilta mean? When the Torah says when Mechilta says there were arguments in every other trip, doesn't mean literally there were arguments. It's not that there was the opposite of peace, not that there was fighting. All it means is there wasn't one heart. There were many opinions. Everyone has a different way of looking at things. Hashem created every person with a different perspective. When When something has to get accomplished, when many people have to accomplish something, naturally there's going to be many opinions of how to get this stuff done. That's how Hashem made the world. When something has to get done by many people, there are going to be many different ways, many different perspectives of something that's going to get done. That doesn't mean that they're fighting. That means that there are many opinions. That's why it says they traveled, because although they're all going to the same place, but there were many, many different perspectives of how that, what that journey meant to them and what that journey was about and how they approached that journey. Especially according to what Chassidus says, that the 42 journeys in the desert correspond to 42 spiritual levels in the service of Hashem. The 42 journeys, as Baal Shem Tov says, that there are 42 journeys every single day. When you wake up in the morning from Eda'ani till Hamapil, there are 42 journeys. Baal Shem Tov says in your lifetime, there are 42 journeys. Baal Shem Tov says in history, there are 42 journeys. So there are 42 journeys that they left from Egypt, arriving to Israel, are parallel to 42 spiritual levels within each of us. So if we're talking about deep spiritual things, certainly everyone has their own journey. Everyone is traveling, they're all traveling together, but they're all traveling in a different way because everyone has different heart, different soul, and so traveling forward means something different. Just like on a simple level, if all of us sitting together right now, all of us today, we decide we're going to ascend in our service of Hashem, we're going to go to the next level. The next level for each of us is something totally different. Dr. Bressman, of course, it means going to allow all of his patients to eat mezanis every single day, no more oatmeal, whatever. Everyone has their own different way of his mind. Higher level will be to eat the oatmeal, whatever. Everyone has different level that they need to ascend to. What was unique about the giving of the Torah, what was unique about arriving at Mount Sinai according to the Mechilta was that there weren't many different feelings. There weren't many different perspectives. They were all like one person next to the mountain. They all had in their hearts the same feeling. Leiv echa mamish, literally one heart. Feel leilavav. Neishater mavil deishom mushlam. Goram laachtas b'chasit Yisrael. Adasher zbatach chukdes b'neim. Because the Torah brings to absolute perfect peace, absolute unity, so that all the differences between everybody disintegrated. Everything melted away. Kach muvan. By the let's look at note 14 for a second. Now we can understand why the Mechilta has the word Sham. The Torah has the word Sham according to the Mechilta's interpretation. This journey was unique in their unity. Because their unity was in a way of, without, there weren't differences in perspective, there was total unity between everybody. Everyone's heart was the same to receive the Torah. This also answers, how come that split-second journey from Ramses to Sukkot, how come in that journey it says they traveled. It was in blink of an eye. Although it was impossible for them to argue in the blink of an eye, however, you still cannot say that this journey was in the singular. There still were lots of feelings in that blink of an eye. Everyone went from point A to point B, but everyone had a whole different thing that was going on in their head. What puts us all together, what makes the differences between us disintegrate, is the fact that we're standing next to Mount Sinai, going to receive the Torah. But in every other journey, yes, it's impossible to argue within a split second, fine. But does that journey mean the same thing? That split second journey, You're thinking about how you were used to be working for the Pharaoh, and you had to carry the bricks. I'm thinking about the fact that it says in the Medrash that they gave the women's job to the men and the men's job to the women. I'm thinking about the babysitting, and I'm so happy I don't have to babysit anymore. It's interesting, men say when they're home that they're babysitting. Women don't use that word, not babysitting. They're home. Anyways, but so everyone different. They're leaving Egypt. What they're feeling leaving Egypt is a split second. But if we were to examine everyone's heart in a laboratory, what did they feel at that moment? There's all kinds of feelings. Therefore, it doesn't say he traveled. Everyone was going to the same place with a whole different feeling. What's unique about the Torah is the Torah brings us to have actually one heart. There aren't different perspectives, that all the differences disintegrate. But Rashi, it says something more. I know it sounds like it's something less, but it's really something more. What does Rashi say? And not only does the Torah bring unity in a place where there is argument, where there are differences of opinion, like the Mechilta says, not only does the Torah cause the differences between us to melt away and us to share the same perspective. That's nice. But the Rashi says it's even more. Even in a situation where there's arguments and there's fights, the Torah is able to enter that zone as well and break away all the fights. Even in a situation where there are lots of fights and differences, not just differences of opinion, but fights, what does the Torah accomplish? The Torah, by being next to the mountain, there is no more fighting. That's where they camped in a way of unity. Every other time they camped and traveled, there was a fight. What was unique over here, that even though they're living in a world where there are fights and they always fought, but the Torah is able to enter a zone of fighting as well and cause a fighting to stop. Torah doesn't just bring everyone together and have the same perspective, have to be next to the mountain and let and the Torah doesn't just accomplish we could share perspective. The Torah is able to enter a more dirty, uchi place of argument and to cause that uchi place to be like one person with one heart. I started the class today with a letter from the Rebbe to Kfar Chabad. Just remembered there was one incident in Kfar Chabad. This was in the 80s. There was a lot of fighting going on. And the Rebbe spoke to all the residents of Kfar Chabad together, a fire sikha to them about unity and love. And it's interesting, Rabbi Mendel Futafas, after this fire sikha, you'd think like you'd speak in a very musardik way, in a very ramming into them. But he spoke in a very playful, humorous way. I can't even say some of the things he said at that time, but I'll just suffice it to say that he was describing how one little boy used to hit other kids in many different ways, and he did tshuva, and he only hit the other kids in one way, not hit them in the other way. He didn't hit them below the belt. That was his big tshuva. So that's what's unique about the Torah. The Torah doesn't just bring us to a place where we let go of our different perspectives. The Torah has a power to take us from the lower place and bring us from the lowest place to have Avos Yisrael. There was one Farbrengen, I'll let you guys go with one more thing. There was one Farbrengen, that in the middle of the Farbrengen there was a fight. People were fighting. There was a lot of pushing, was squeezed together. So there's a lot of pushing and stuff. So the Rebbe, I don't know exactly what the fight was about. I just read it, so I'm not sure exactly how violent they got. But the Rebbe spoke about the idea of chatchila riber, about going straight over. The Rebbe says instead of straight over meaning to go to a higher level of service of Hashem, going straight over means going from a situation of fighting to Avos Yisrael. So that's what the Torah accomplishes, going from a place of negativity and discord and disagreement and fights, but being next to the mountain of Hashem, that causes there not to be the argument, not to be the separation, to get together. That's what this week is about. This week is a week of the king is in the field. Tzemach Tzedek said, Shavuos is the time the king is in the palace, but the week of Parshas Yisrei is the king is in the field in reference to receiving the Torah. Anyways, have a great day, Menachem Mendel. Great day, David. Great day, Michal Mordechai. Great day, Dr. Bressman. Great day, Jonathan. Great day, Jeff.